Okay, so we are going to start. Going back 75 years, I think 75 years is a golden jubilee, is that what it is, 75 years? And so that's my mother-in-law, that's my father-in-law. He was a World War II vet. He benefited from the GI Bill, being a World War II vet. And they've been married about 3 years at this point, and they're about ready to move from the Bronx into the suburbs, like a lot of other people. Back in 1950, actually the migration started around 1947 or so, of people moving to the suburbs. As Harry Truman, he is the President of the United States, and you might remember when you were kids, the Korean War, which started in 1950. Red China has been around only about 2 months when we start 1950, or 3 months when we start 1950, and that's Mao Zedong, Red China. My ninth grade history teacher, a guy by the name of Stewie Gates at Spring Valley Junior High School back in 1969, used to reinforce about China. He said it was Red China or Communist China. Just recently passed away. He was still fighting fires into his 90s. He was about 94, 95. He just recently died within the last couple months. China invaded Tibet. Joe McCarthy, McCarthyism, he starts his reign in Wheeling, West Virginia in February of 1950. Never produced any card-carrying communist, but he started his reign. There was an assassination attempt against Harry Truman. Anybody own a car like that, or know anybody who owned a car like that? General Motors is one of the biggest companies in the United States. How many of you have credit cards? The credit card nationally comes into picture in 1950. It's called a charge card, and it was the Diners Club. I don't know if anybody here had the Diners Club card, but it was the Diners Club card. Charlie Brown and Snoopy are introduced in 1950. How many of you read the Peanuts comic strip? Well, you're smiling on that one. You're smiling on that one, yeah. So that starts in 1950 in newspapers across the country and globally. How many of you played with Silly Putty? Sure, Silly Putty. You could throw that, slap it down on the newspaper, pick it up, and you can see what was on the newspaper. You could fling it around. Anyway, buy me wherever toys are sold. Buy me where you bought this comic, Silly Putty, which came about by accident. The NBA desegregates. Anybody basketball fan here? The National Basketball Association had African American players for the first time. The NFL takes in 3 All-America Football Conference teams in 1950. Families were moving out to the suburbs, like my in-laws, and kids watched Howdy Doody on a 12-inch black and white TV. How many of you watched Howdy Doody? Anybody in the peanut gallery? I knew 2 people in the peanut gallery. A guy by the name of Larry Strickler, who was a child actor on the Milton Berle Show, Texaco Star Theater, and also my friend Steve North. And he was there because his father was a stage manager at NBC, so he could go whenever he wanted to because his father was running the stage at NBC. Anyway, generally the man was the guy, or he was the household sole breadwinner. The income about $3,300 a year, maybe about $4,500 today, $45,000 today. Americans had jobs and money. Well, some Americans did. Jim Crow was the norm in the South, and the Cold War created fear of communists, and fear that a bomb could be dropped at any moment. How many of you were like this when you were in school? How many of you did that? Well, I did too, and I asked Mrs. Topper in 1961, why are we doing that? Shut up and get underneath there. They never told us. Well, the reason why you dropped down to the floor was that the theory was that the particles in the atomic and nuclear bomb would rise and you would have a better chance of living if indeed you were that small. And you put your hands like that because the shrapnel It's better going into your arms than in your head. Anyway, about 1/3 of the United States 75 years ago had no indoor plumbing. No indoor plumbing. And I got a story about that. In 1999, I gave a talk at Central Michigan University, which is in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, right in the center of the state. And the guy that brought me in was a guy by the name of Walter Schneider. So you're going back 25 years. So he was in either his late 50s or early 60s. And he told me the first time he saw indoor plumbing is when he went to college. Grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and he was amazed at looking at a toilet. He had never seen a toilet bowl before, but indoor plumbing. Anyway, so only 1/3 of the households then had no indoor plumbing. Korean War starts. It begins on June 25th. 75,000 soldiers from the North Korea People's Army go across the 38th parallel, the boundary between the Soviet-backed Democratic People's Republic of Korea, that's in the north, and the pro-Western Republic Korea to the south. This invasion was the first military action of the Cold War. In July, American troops had entered the war on South Korea's side. For American officials, it was a war against the forces of international communism itself, whether that was Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union or Mao Zedong, the newly captured China for the communists. The seeds of war had started a lot earlier. North Korea's Kim Il-sung went to Moscow in 1949 and again in 1950, and he wanted Stalin to say, hey, go ahead and invade. Now this guy was a nobody who all of a sudden goes to the Soviet Union, and they he goes through the ranks, and they kind of make him almost godlike in Korea when he comes back. He got support from Stalin, and Mao Zedong invaded the south. Thousands of Chinese troops were sent to aid the North Koreans. And there is General Douglas MacArthur. Douglas MacArthur in World War II, you might remember, he was in the Philippines and said, I will return. Well, he's still in Eastern Asia in 1950, and he is the guy in charge. On the first day of the war, the United Nations Security Council demanded that North Korea stop the fighting and go back to the other side of the 38th parallel. The warning, of course, was ignored. It passed a second resolution asking its member states to assist South Korea in repelling the attack. It established a unified command under the U.S. General Douglas MacArthur, who would later not survive Korea. He was fired, but we're jumping ahead of the story right now. The United States and South Korea provided most of the manpower and military equipment, and there were 15 countries involved: the United Kingdom, France, Australia, Canada, Turkey, and Ethiopia. Mao, Stalin, and Korea. And there's Stalin and there's Mao Zedong. China entered the war in October, of course on the side of North Korea, but MacArthur initially discounted its importance. If they tried to advance, then there would be the greatest slaughter, MacArthur told Truman. Unfortunately, he was proven wrong, as by November, the Chinese had sent the overextended American troops into the longest retreat in American military history. That was named the Big Bug Out. Following the Big Bug Out, the Truman administration abandoned its goal of unifying Korea and said, look, let's work with the communists, let's not have a war over this. But MacArthur said, no, 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 we're going to continue and continue and continue, and he wanted to escalate the war. In December, he stated that Washington's refusal to allow him to attack bases in China was an enormous handicap without precedent in military history. He also wanted a blockade of China and bring the Chinese nationalists from Taiwan into the conflict, like Chiang Kai-shek, who got kicked out of the mainland, among other all-out measures. Mao and Red, or Communist China. Throughout the 1930s and into World War II, Mao's forces continued their attacks on the Chinese government. They were victorious in 1949, and the Communist People's Republic of China was declared in that year. It's October 1st, And here is Mao Zedong, and he is telling the world China is now communist. The Civil War is over. We've kicked out Chiang Kai-shek and the Soong sisters and all the other people, and we're communists now. Communists gained control of mainland China and forced the leadership of the Republic of China to retreat to the island of Taiwan. There's been a lasting political and military standoff with the ROC of Taiwan and the PRC, mainland China, both officially claiming to be the legitimate government of all of China. And here is Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong in happier days, and maybe not, but they are together in 1945 when they had a common enemy, Japan. Japan had declared war on China back in 1937. There were all kinds of skirmishes over a half-decade by that point. Mao prevailed, China went communist. The United States, which backed the nationalists against invading Japanese forces during World War II, supports Chiang's exiled Republic of China government in Taipei. Treaty. Well, the communists from the Soviet Union and the communists from the Red China decided they need a treaty, although they had problems throughout the years. The Sino-Soviet Treaty of Friendship, Alliance, and Mutual Assistance, or Sino-Soviet Treaty of Friendship and Alliance, is signed by the People's Republic of China and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics on February 14th. The Soviets recognized the People's Republic of China and recalled recognition of the Republic of China, which is now Taiwan. Here's Chiang Kai-shek, and here he is with MacArthur. On March 1st, Chiang Kai-shek resumed the presidency of national China on Taiwan. On May 8th, he asked the U.S. for weapons. On July 1st and August 1st, July 31st and August 1st, MacArthur arrives in Taipei to confer with Chiang Kai-shek on Taiwan's defense. Washington and Taipei become allies. China invades Tibet. That's the Dalai Lama. That's the young Dalai Lama, who is still around, the Dalai Lama. It's 1949, and Mao Zedong threatens Tibet with liberation. On October 7th, China enforces a long-held claim to Tibet with an invasion. 1 month after China invaded Tibet, El Salvador sponsored a complaint by the Tibetan government at the UN, but India and the United Kingdom prevented the complaint from being debated. In April, the NSC, National Security Council 68 report was completed, presented to Harry Truman. The report contained recommendations of how to approach the Cold War with the Soviet Union. The report suggested the United States should pursue an aggressive military expansion, build up nuclear weaponry, as well as enacting the policy of containment against communist nations. Now, I assume all of you grew up in the 1950s. Were you worried about being attacked by Russia or the Soviet Union? You were. So, but the United States is building up its defenses. The Cold War, Moscow, 1950. In 1947, the United States House and Un-American Activities Committee brought the Cold War home in another way. The committee began a series of hearings designed to show that communist subversion in the United States was alive and well. It became the blacklist. In Hollywood, the House on Un-American Activities forced hundreds of people who worked in the movie industry to renounce left-wing political beliefs and testify against one another, like Julius Garfinkel, who was John Garfield, and Emmanuel Goldberg, who was Edward G. Robinson, among others. More than 500 people lost their jobs. Many of these blacklisted writers, directors, and actors, and others were unable to work for more than a decade, like Zero Mostel. In Pete Seeger's case, it was 18 years. The House on Un-American Activity Committee also accused State Department workers of engaging in subversive activities, which leads to this guy, Joseph McCarthy. Now, Joe McCarthy had allies in Washington in the meeting. He had allies. And when you start looking at Joe McCarthy, he's a nobody. He's a backbencher. He's the junior senator from Wisconsin. and really doesn't have all that much on his resume. Yeah, he was in World War II, but he doesn't really have all that much. And yet, here it is, Wheeling, Virginia, and it's February 9th. And this guy, Joe McCarthy, who's an obscure senator, all of a sudden gives this speech to the Women's Republican Club of Wheeling, West Virginia, that included the sentence that 205 communists had infiltrated the State Department. Why was this covered? It's a good question. He's in Wheeling. Okay, Wheeling today has 1/3 the population it had in 1950. Wheeling was a port, it was a steel town, it was a coal town. There was a lot of money there. If you go there today, you can see there was once a lot of money. The theater there, mansions were there. It's all been abandoned. Wheeling is one of the poorest places in the United States today. Go across the Ohio border, which is separated by the Ohio River, and it's the same thing. It is the exact same thing. Why is the media covering him in Wheeling, West Virginia? It's a question I've never had answered. That created a furor and vaulted him into the headlines across the country. However, when he testified before the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, he proved unable to produce the name of a single card-carrying communist in any government department. The media loved him. They embraced him. Why? Well, because he was unpredictable. Well, he's very predictable, but he was willing to talk to the media, and I'm in the media. I can tell you one thing, it's a lot easier when somebody flaps their gums than having to go after somebody. It made life easy for them. So he becomes a star. Starting in the late 1940s, America became obsessed with rooting out communists and communist sympathizers, using allegations that were often founded on tenuous evidence or outright lies. The Red Scare ruined lives and movements and pushed the country deeper into an era of gossip, paranoia, and struggle between national security and individual rights. McCarthy was aided by friendly journalists, and they all capitalized on the fear. This is Wheeling, West Virginia today, and ain't much going on in Wheeling, West Virginia, and that's downtown outside the arena. And if you go through Wheeling, it looks like an x-ray of teeth when you lose most of your teeth. There are a couple buildings here, but most of the place is deserted. And even the stores, they've been out of business for a long time. They can't get stores to come there. McCarthy went on an anti-communist crusade. He appeared to his supporters as a dedicated patriot and to his detractors as an irresponsible, self-seeking witch hunter who was undermining the country's traditions of civil liberties. Truman established loyalty boards that evaluated and dismissed federal employees on reasonable grounds for belief in disloyalty. The United States Congress, or rather Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court upheld Red Scare policies, including a law that banned communist teachers from New York public schools. McCarthy also alleged that lesbians and gays and transgender government employees could be blackballed by enemy agents over their sexuality and betray national secrets. In 1950, a special report was drawn up by the senator's Republican allies in the Senate minority at the time, and they said gay and lesbian workers are a potential moral threat to the working of the government. It was full scare tactics by 1950. This is Klaus Fuchs. He's a spy. And something happened about nuclear secrets that comes to the forefront in 1950. He was a German theoretical physicist and atomic spy who supplied information from the American, Britain, and Canadian Manhattan Project to the Soviet Union during and shortly after World War II. While at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, Fuchs was responsible for many significant theoretical calculations relating to the first nuclear weapons and later early models of the hydrogen bomb. It was not till 1949, 4 years after the end of World War II, that decrypted cables from the United States Army Single Intelligence Service And my father-in-law was part of that. Allegedly, you had to have an IQ of 150 or better to be part of that group. The Verona Project revealed that Fuchs was a Soviet spy. He was arrested in January, charged with violating the Official Secrets Act. He admitted to spying for the USSR, and he was convicted of espionage in March. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison, of which he served 9. His testimony led to the arrest of Harry Gold, David Greenglass, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, the Rosenbergs. Truman orders Hellbomb made, the hydrogen bomb development. Ex-hubby loses $1,650 a month in alimony. The New York Daily News, that's their headline. Make a bomb and some guy loses money in alimony. Anyway, 3 cents. 3 cents for the Daily News back then. On January 31st, Truman publicly announced his decision to support the development of a hydrogen bomb, a weapon theorized to be hundreds of times more powerful than the atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan during World War II. 1949, the United States lost its nuclear superiority when the Soviet Union successfully detonated an atomic bomb. Then several weeks after that, the British and U.S. intelligence came to the conclusion that Klaus Fuchs was a spy for the Soviet Union. And there is Julius, and there is Ethel, the Rosenbergs. In 1939, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were members of the Communist Party of the United States, active members. Now, my mother-in-law was telling me there were a lot of communists around back then. But this is how they became communists. They didn't know how they became communists. You would go to a dance sponsored by somebody, and you wouldn't know it's sponsored by a communist club. She never signed any of those things because she was suspicious about everything. Even me, when I started dating my wife, she was suspicious of me because I had good teeth. And if we had got married, we'd have kids with good teeth. Well, my daughter needed braces. Anyway, Julius attained a job in 1940 as a civil engineer with the U.S. Army Single Corps. And he and Ethel began working together to disclose U.S. military secrets to the Soviet Union. Now, Ethel's brother, Sergeant David Greenglass, was assigned as a machinist in the Manhattan Project to build the atomic bomb, and he provided the Rosenbergs with data on nuclear weapons. The Rosenbergs turned over the information to Harry Gold, a Swiss-born courier, for the espionage ring, and he passed it on to Anatoly A. Yakovlev, the Soviet's vice consul in New York City. And here he is being arrested, Julius Rosenberg. He was discharged by the Army in 1945. He lied about his membership in the Communist Party. Gold was arrested on May 23rd in connection with the case of the British spy Klaus Fuchs, who had been arrested for giving U.S. and British nuclear secrets to the Soviet Union. As Sing Sing, not too far from here, Sing Sing, and that's me in front of Sing Sing. You gotta make this authentic, you know? So anyway, there was Sing Sing on a nice day a couple of years ago. Julius Rosenberg was arrested on the suspicion of espionage on June 17th and accused of heading a spy ring that passed top secret information concerning the atomic bomb to the Soviet Union. He was sent to Sing Sing. Greenglass was arrested in July. Ethel was arrested in August. Another co-conspirator, Morton Sobel, college classmate of Julius Rosenberg, fled to Mexico but was extradited. Meanwhile, there was an assassination attempt on Harry Truman. It all had to deal with Puerto Rico and getting Puerto Rico independence. This is one of the assassins who was killed. It's November 1st, and Puerto Rican nationalists Hiroso Torosola and Oscar Collazo attempt to assassinate Harry Truman at the Blair House in Washington, D.C. He was living at the Blair House because the White House was being renovated. The attack was thwarted by White House police officer, including Leslie Cufflet, who was killed in the line of duty. Torosola was killed and Collazo was wounded. Collazo and Torosola belonged to an extremist Puerto Rican nationalist party which sought to gain independence from the United States. The Independentistas targeted Truman, though on July 4th he publicly signed Public Law 600, which gave Puerto Ricans the power to write their own constitution. Guam becomes an American territory. Let me ask you a question. How many of you know what American territories are there today? Guam, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, American Samoa. Those are territories. In those days, the territories included Alaska and Hawaii. But Guam finally becomes a territory. During the Spanish-American War, the United States captured Guam on June 21st, 1898, under the Treaty of Paris, signed December 10, 1898. Spain ceded Guam to the United States effective April 11, 1899. The United States became a colonial power in 1899. Also added was Wake Island in 1889. So back in 1889, the United States also consisted of a couple territories within the 48 states, Arizona and Mexico, along with Alaska, Hawaii, Guam, Cuba, Philippines, Wake Island, Hawaii. Anyway, after World War II, the Guam Organic Act of 1950 established Guam as an unincorporated organized territory of the United States, provided for the structure of the island's civilian government, and granted limited citizenship to the people who are living there. The limited citizenship, well, you can't vote for president, can't vote for senate, can't vote for Congress, because you don't have a senator, you don't have a congressman. But they got all other U.S. citizens' rights, including Medicare and Social Security. It becomes a hub for the United States in terms of the military, because Pacific hotspots are nearby. It's a 30-mile long tropical island. U.S. residents are not allowed to vote for president. Their congressional representation is a non-voting member. Its importance is simple. It's the United States military post nearest to Asia. Also, a few years ago, when North Korea was talking about bombing the United States, nuclear bomb, it would be Guam because it was the closest area to North Korea. The Middle East powder keg. Does that sound familiar, the Middle East powder keg? 75 years ago. The powder keg. And there's a woman, peace hopes, still talking about that today. On July 5th in Israel, the law of return was passed, which gives Jews the right to relocate in Israel and acquire Israeli citizenship. Section 1 of the law of return declares that every Jew has the right to come to this country as an Ola or an immigrant. The West Bank is annexed by Jordan, while the Gaza Strip falls under Egyptian control. Approximately 960,000 Palestinian refugees, mostly in Gaza, Jordan, and Lebanon, are registered for relief by the UN. This is 75 years later. We're talking about the same thing, aren't we? 75 years later, same thing's going on. On June 17th, Egypt, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and Syria signed a security pact. Groups Act, South Africa. Let's get apartheid really going. We're going to really step it up. The Groups Act, to provide for the establishment of group areas, the control of acquisition of movable property and the occupation of land and premises, and for matters incidental. I can't make out that word because it's just corroded. The Groups Act was a mechanism which allowed the cities and towns of South Africa to be divided into segregated residential and business areas. Thousands of colors, blacks and Indians, were removed from areas classified for white occupation. The Group Areas Act and the Land Acts maintain residential segregation. The Great Brinks Robbery. How many of you have seen the movie The Great Brinks Robbery? Lots of things have been assigned to this. Anyway, the Boston Daily Globe. $1.5 million holdup, 7 masked men robbed Brinks. Boston, leave another million. The Great Brinks Robbery is an armed robbery of the Brinks building at the east corner of Prince Street and Commercial Street in the north end of Boston, Massachusetts. That's the Italian district. Mama Anna's there, where I always go to eat. Mama's Anna over there, so it's right over there. You probably don't know it. It's not far from where the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere took place, and it's right in the heart of the Italian section. Anyway, on January 17th, it was $2.775 million, which would be about $30 million today. Theft consisted of $1,218,211.29 in cash, $1,557,183 in checks, money orders, and other securities. It was the largest robbery in the history of the United States and remained so until 1984. The robbery, skillfully executed with few clues left at the scene, was billed as a crime of the century. It was the work of an 11-man gang. 10 of them would later be arrested. See the USA in your Chevrolet. That came later. That was Dinah Shore. How many remember See the USA in your Chevrolet? That was a song that was about 2.5 minutes long. Anyway, that's a Chevrolet. How'd you like to own that Chevrolet today?
See the USA in your Chevrolet.
Right.
America is asking you to call.
Yep.
Okay.
Dinah Shore. In 1950, General Motors held about 40 to 45% of automobile sales, and they tried to gap it there, because if they went over 50, they might have been busted up as a monopoly, so they kind of want to keep it under 50%. GM was one of the largest employers in the world. On March 13th, General Motors Corporation reports a record earning of $656,434,232, which would easily be about, about $11 billion today. GM operated 6 divisions at the time, one of which, GMC, sold only trucks. And the other 5, well, it was a caste system. You had the most prestigious to least prestigious. Anybody own a Cadillac here? No Cadillac. Oh, you did. So you're the most prestigious guy here. Then came the Buick. Anybody own a Buick there? Okay, you were second highest. How about Oldsmobile? Okay, you were in the middle. How about Pontiac? You also own the Pontiac.
About that year?
Well, not that year in your life. And Chevrolet. See the USA in your Chevrolet. That was the lowest of the caste system. How many of you have credit cards? Credit cards. Credit cards. Well, you can thank this guy for the invention of the credit card because he was an idiot. He was an idiot, and this is what his story. This guy is Francis X. McNamara. In 1949, he was the head of the Hamilton Credit Corporation, and he goes out to eat with Alfred Bloomingdale, McNamara's longtime friend and grandson, and founder of Bloomingdale Store, and Ralph Snyder, McNamara's attorney. They go to eat at a place called Major's Cabin Grill. That's a New York restaurant located next to the Empire State Building. Well, at the end of the meal with his 2 friends, McNamara reached into his pocket for his wallet so he could pay for the meal in cash. Guess what? He doesn't have his wallet. His wallet's not there. Uh-oh. So, you could ask the friends, but wouldn't that be embarrassing if he has to ask the friends, hey, can you help me out? I kind of left my wallet. I don't know, I might have lost my wallet. So anyway, he had to call his wife, and she brought down the money. McNamara vowed that it would never happen again. This thing could never happen again because I was an idiot. I left my wallet at home. McNamara discussed the idea with Bloomingdale and Snyder, and the 3 pulled some money together and started a new company called the Diners Club. How many of you had the Diners Club card back in the day? You did. On May 13th, Diners Club issues its first credit cards. There you go. That's a Diners Club card. Did yours look like that? No? Okay. This was Mr. Alfred Bloomingdale, 110 North Sonoma Boulevard in Los Angeles, California. When did it expire? Expired September 30th, 1957. The original form of the Diners Club card was not a credit card per se, it was a charge card. It didn't carry any revolving credit, and it charged membership fees rather than interest. People using the card paid it off every month. How many of you had a TV that looked something like that? How many of you remember your first TVs? Where were you from originally?
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn. So you had people in the building come to your house to watch TV?
No, we had a two-family house.
Oh, you had a two-family house.
Yeah.
Anybody have a tenant, live in a tenement, and everybody came to see what? A tenement. Anybody live in a tenement? Bronx, Brooklyn. Well, I had one woman telling me, it's a good story. She said that she's living in the Bronx. And that living in the Bronx, she said that she had little kids, and the kids were brats. And she never could get a babysitter. Nobody wanted to babysit. Until she got the TV. And then she had too many babysitters. She didn't know what to do with them because she got one of these TVs. Hazel Scott. Anybody hear of Hazel Scott? First African American to host a national TV show on the Dumont Network. Hazel Scott was a great pianist. She played two pianos at once, like that. And she gets her TV show. In 1950, the jazz pianist and singer Hazel Scott was the first African Caribbean woman, she was born in Trinidad and Tobago, to host her own television show on the Dumont Television Network on July 3rd. Show came to an abrupt end just after a few months. She was named in Red Channels. That was a pamphlet that said these people were communists on June 22nd, but Dumont put her on the air 11 days later. She was married to Congressman the Reverend Adam Clayton Powell II, and he said, don't testify. You're going to ruin your career. Don't do it. Don't do it. Do yourself a favor. Don't do it. Well, she said, no, I'm going to defend myself. After all, she had played piano in New York, in Greenwich Village, at the Cafe Society, which was a noted communist hangout back in the late 30s when she was a teenager, but she had no alliance to communism. She wasn't a card-carrying communist, so she wanted to tell everybody that. Well, she testifies, and within a week, the sponsors are gone, and the show is gone. A radio star is asked to do TV. Recognize that radio star? Radio star is asked to do TV.
It's Lucille Ball.
That's Lucille Ball, 1948, when she was 37 years old and got her first big break by accident. In 1950, well, I'll tell you by accident. She was doing a show called My Favorite Husband. It was only a test show, and it went on the air July 5th only because our Miss Brooks wasn't available to go on CBS Radio. So they threw it on there, and they figured, the worst thing that could happen is that it's a bomb and nobody will ever remember it. Except it wasn't a bomb. It was a pretty popular radio show for 2 years after they put it on. So CBS decides, hey, you know what? She's pretty hot in terms of likability. Why don't we see if we could get her to do TV? She's 39 years old at this point. She had that one big break, but she was just another actress in Hollywood who did radio and did B movies. So yeah, you're going to offer me a show? Good, I'm going to take it. Except I am going to negotiate with you because I've been in this business for 22 years. And in the 22 years, I've seen it all. Seen everything. And you know what? Even though I have no leverage, you asked me to do it, these are my demands. And her first demand becomes a major sticking point. She wanted her real husband, Desi Arnaz, a Cuban exile, as a matter of fact, to play her husband on television, possibly to save her marriage. CBS balked at the prospect. Jello and CBS, the potential sponsors, thought the American public would never accept Desi Arnaz as the husband of a red-blooded American girl from Jamestown, New York. It just wasn't going to work. CBS and Jello said, hey, you know what? You got good chemistry with Richard Denning on the show, My Favorite Husband. Continue. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Jello said, well, Lucy's being a problem. We're not involved with this. Philip Morris came in. Lucy wanted to save her marriage, hence working together. They were married. They were legally married. And that's a key point here. They were legally married. Ball told CBS, you have both of us or neither. Eventually, CBS conceded, even though the network had doubts since Desi was Cuban, had the strong Cuban accent. Lucy, explain. Desi and Lucy were an interracial or multi-ethnic couple. That didn't fly in 1950s America. Yes, they were married. They were legally married in Connecticut. But you have to go back to 1877 to figure out why CBS and Jello had a problem. That's Rutherford B. Hayes, President of the United States. America's civil rights movement was stalled since 1875. Desegregation in the South ended with the Rutherford B. Hayes, Samuel J. Tilden presidential race in 1876. Nobody to this day knows who really won that race. It was really close. Hayes became the president after the Democrats cut a deal with the Republicans. Democrats wanted federal troops out of the South. They got what they want by giving up the Oval Office. Interracial marriage at that point, when Lucy and Desi were pitching the show in 1950, was illegal in 17 states. That is why CBS, that is why Jello had a lot of problems with it, because it was the law of the land. 17 states, blacks and whites, or in Desi's case, Hispanics and whites could not marry. They go on tour in 1950. They're going to prove that they can be believable as a couple. And they did well on that tour. Desi was believable. In early 1951, they produced a pilot for the series with $5,000 of their own money. The rest is history. By the way, Lucy thought even if we got the show on TV, it wasn't going to last more than a year. It was a struggle to get that show on TV. Althea Gibson, how many of you heard of her? Well, if you get a quarter this year, you might see on the back of that quarter. Althea Gibson was clearly worthy of an invitation to tennis's big events. She was never invited because she was a Negro. Four-time national champion Alice Marble weighed in with a letter that appeared in the July 1950 issue of American Lawn Tennis magazine, noting that a committee member had told Gibson would be judged on her performance in invitational tournaments to which she was not invited. Miss Gibson is over a very cunning wrought barrel. She's not being judged by the yardstick of ability, but by the fact her pigmentation is somewhat different. She is a fellow tennis player, and as such, deserving of the chance to prove herself. On August 22nd, Althea Gibson becomes the first black competitor in a United States national tennis competition. The NBA barred Negroes. Any basketball fans here? You are a basketball fan. Until 1950, Negroes were not allowed to play in the National Basketball Association. There was a Japanese American who played in the NBA in 1947, which is an amazing feat by itself. That's John McClendon. And in 1995, down at the county center in White Plains, I got a chance to interview John McClendon, who at that point was about an 85-year-old man who was still involved in basketball operations. It was a summer league, and I was talking to McClendon for about an hour, and it's his story I'm going to give you, not my story. This is directly from him. In 1946, a new basketball league called the Basketball Association of America formed with teams mostly in the big eastern cities, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Washington. The arena owners just wanted to fill up dates. For some reason known only to the BAA owners, the league put up a color barrier. 1942, Toledo White Huts owner Sid Goldberg broke the National Basketball League's color barrier by signing 4 African-American players, Bill Jones, Casey Jones, Al Price, and Shanny Barnett. The Chicago Studebakers, and let me explain these names. They were in the league, but they were all usually either sponsored by, say, Studebaker or owned by Studebaker, and the employees of the team, of the company, would play on those teams. Anyway, of the NBL joined the White Hut, signing 6 black players: Wyatt Sonny Boswell, Roscoe Duke Cumberland, Tony Payton, Bernie Price, Rusey Hudson, and Hillary Brown. McClendon, and now we get into his story, was coaching for the North Carolina College for Negroes, and he would alert an NBA team official telling them he knew that African American players who could play in the league in 1950, and he goes to the Washington Capitals and he says, take a look at some of the players I'm recommending. This guy, Earl Lloyd. McClendon forced the issue and brought the 2 players to try out in Washington in 1950. That brought down the barrier. The Washington Capitals, this is McClendon. The Washington Capitals were the first team to have historically black school products on their team. They preceded Boston by a week. The 2 guys ahead of the Boston Celtics, Chuck Cooper, Harold Hunter, and Earl Lloyd. On October 31st, Earl Lloyd became the first African American to play in an NBA game. Now, I mentioned the fact that there was a Japanese American in the league before black players. His name was Wat Asaka. Played with the New York Knicks in 1947, just 2 years after World War II rather, and less than 2 years after the closing of Japanese American internment camps in March of 1946. He played 3 games with the Knicks. The Misaka family was not ordered into an internment camp. Broadway Open House. How many of you watched Johnny Carson, or Steve Allen, or Jack Parr, or later on Jay Leno, and now Jimmy Fallon? Well, this was the first show of its type. Actually, it wasn't. It was the first show on NBC. By the way, the first host of a late-night TV show was a woman, Faye Emerson, on CBS. It wasn't Steve Allen. Steve Allen came later. A woman was the first person to host a late-night talk show. But Broadway Open House was the first on NBC. It starts on May 29th. It was created by an advertising executive by the name of Sylvester Pat Weaver, whose daughter you might know, Sigourney Weaver, the actress. Jerry Lester and Maury Amsterdam were the hosts. Maury left the show, leaving Lester. Jenny Lewis, or Dagmar, would become the star of the show because of 2 reasons. And there are the 2 reasons she became the star of the show. Now, I was at a place about 15 years ago. There was a guy about maybe 90 years old, something like that. And he starts breathing heavily. He's and I'm like, you okay? I'll stop talking. You okay? I want to get you help. Oh, no, I'm fine. I said, you sure you're fine? He said, I'm fine. I said, what's the problem? She was the best breather on TV. I used to love watching her breathe. Starlet Jenny Lewis was given no script and told, just sit there and act dumb. Your name is Dagmar. With her new name, she sat on a stool with a sign around her neck saying, girl singer. Did breathing exercise. Remember the guy said she was the best breather on TV? She did breathing exercise. And soon performed as a reader of poems and plays, while Lester made occasional jokes about her hidden talents. Her appearances created a sensation, leading to much press coverage, and she got an increase in pay. $75 a week, which is about $2,000 today, to $1,250 a week. Lester left the program, and the show ended in 1951. They gave her other things, but she never succeeded. How many of you ever watched Dick Tracy? Not the cartoon, the Dick Tracy show. This was supposedly the most violent show ever on TV.
Ralph Bird.
Yeah, yep. Ralph Bird, there it is. So you watched it. Anyway, Ralph Bird played the square-jawed sleuth and comic strip character Dick Tracy in all 4 Republic movie serials, 2 RKO full-length films, reprised the role in a short-lived action series, Dick Tracy, ran on ABC from 50 to 51. The premiere of the show was in September, which ran at various times across the country. It sparked an uproar because there was too much violence in the show. I'm not going to ask you if you remember if it was violent or not. It probably was.
I don't remember the violence.
Yeah. Hey, how many of you read this? Charlie Brown, Snoopy. Yeah, there you go. That was one of the first strips ever. Peanuts was a syndicated daily and Sunday American comic strip written and illustrated by Charles M. Schulz. On October 2nd, Charlie Brown, Patty, and Sherman appeared on the funny pages of the Minneapolis Tribune, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, the Denver Post, the Seattle Times, and two newspapers in Pennsylvania, the Evening Chronicle in Allentown and the Globe Times in Bethlehem. How many of you played with Silly Putty? Do you like it?
Loved it.
You love Silly Putty. Comes out 1950. It's discovered by accident. Make Silly Putty stretch. How many of you played Silly Putty stretch? Pick up the comic characters, Silly Putty. Well, Silly Putty comes out on March 6th. The stretchable goo that picks up print off newspapers is introduced. Peter Hodgson introduced James Wright's idea by packaging 1 ounce into a plastic egg. Silly Putty can also pick up dirt and pet hair. Silly Putty bounces like a ball and will break when given a sharp blow. Silly Putty is made from silicone polymer and was originally created to be a rubber substitute for use in World War II. When we get to the end, I'm going to tell you another use for Silly Putty. Coca-Cola is on the cover of Time magazine. May 15th issue, Coca-Cola conquered the world, and Time magazine explained why Coca-Cola was so dominant in business. Coke wasn't like the steel or auto industry. It was a product of marketing analysis, sales training, and advertising. It was also kind of a spy, letting the United States know who drinks Coca-Cola in countries they wanted to know about. Meanwhile, how many remember James Dean? He's forever 26 years old, right?
Yeah.
Forever 26 years old.
Yeah.
That's him in a Pepsi commercial before he became the disillusioned teenager. Pepsi gives more fun, more bounce to the ounce. James Dean transferred to the University of California, Los Angeles in 1950. When he landed a role in the UCLA production of Macbeth, one of his fraternity brothers brought him along to serve as an extra in a Pepsi commercial. After his first day on the shoot, he was given a bit more responsibility. He danced around the jukebox while singing the Pepsi jingle the second day. He caught the eye of the commercial's producer who put him in a 1951 special, Hill Number 1, Story of Faith and Inspiration. He was not always the disillusioned guy that you saw in the movies. The drive-in movie theater. Yeah, I worked at one from 1974 to 1976. You took your kids.
Drive-ins.
You were in the front rows. You should have seen what was going on in the back rows. You want to know? I almost wrote a book about that. I tried to write a book about it. And the movie about what went on after you got to row 11. Bunch of things. Anyway, that movie theater is long gone. Most drive-ins are long gone. Richard Hollingshead originally drew up the concept of the drive-in movie theater after his mother complained how difficult it was to find comfort in the standard theater seat. His mother made him do it. He patented the idea and opened the Park-In Theaters, Inc. in 1933 for $30,000. The patent was overturned in 1950, and drive-in theaters began popping up all over the country starting in 1950. And that is our team from the drive-in movie. We had a drive-in movie team. Two of those guys are dead now. At least two. Anyway, and that's me in the front row. I'm in the front row. With the baby boom, young families began discovering drive-ins like you. Many drive-ins added playgrounds and trade rides. We couldn't, our train was broken, so we never had it. We had a carousel though. Encouraging family attendance. Drive-ins were booming. Cinderella. How many of you saw Cinderella with your kids or as a kid? February 15th, Walt Disney's animated feature Cinderella opens in theaters across the U.S. 6 years in the making, Cinderella became one of Disney's best-loved films and one of the highest-grossing features of 1950. There's a merger between the National Football League and the All-America Football Conference. 10 NFL teams and 3 All-American Football Conference teams joined together. It's called the National American Football League. That happens December 9th, 1949. The 3 AAFC teams, Cleveland Browns, San Francisco 49ers, Baltimore Colts, joined the NFL. The AAFC, New York Yankees players, were divided up between the 2 New York teams, the Giants and Bulldogs, and the Bulldogs became the New York Yanks. The Los Angeles Rams and Los Angeles Dons, owned by Don Amici. Remember Don Amici? And Bob Hope and Louis B. Mayer merged a portion of the AAFC's Buffalo Bills ownership was absorbed into the Browns organization. Baltimore folded after 1950, leaving the NFL with 12 teams. The odds and ends. April 13th, Truman gives military aid to the Vietnamese region of Bao Da. Money is slowly being pumped into French Indochina or Vietnam as early as 1950. October 11th, the Federal Communications Commission issues the first license to broadcast television in color to CBS. They only did it once. On October 26th, Branch Rickey resigns as the Brooklyn Dodgers president in a dispute with Walter O'Malley. Any Brooklyn Dodger fans here? I can't say O'Malley, can I?
Why not?
Okay, 67 years later. Anyway, to a contract with Jackie Robinson, 1945. On November 10th, Jacoby Arbenz is elected president of Guatemala. He would be overthrown because he wanted to keep some of his bananas, and the United States government didn't want to see that. That's another story. Anyway, that would be 1954. December 16th, child star Shirley Temple announces she's retiring at the age of 22. How many of you watched The Good Ship Lollipop and all that other stuff? On The Good Ship Lollipop. December 30th, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia become independent states within the French Union. There goes the drive-in movie. See the crane? Boom, it's going. Boy, I was upset that day. I spent a lot of time at that place. The Korean War was a civil conflict that became a proxy war between the superpowers, clashing over communism and democracy. Between 2 and 4 million people died, 70% of them civilians. No peace treaty was ever signed. Tensions between the Americans and the North Koreans continue. The treaty that was never signed, the truce that was signed, was in 1953. The Dalai Lama went into exile in 1959. China's human rights record still being criticized, including the treatment of Tibet residents. The U.S. and rather communist China resumed diplomatic relations in 1971. Taiwan remains, even today, a diplomatic problem. The recommendations of the National Security Council 68 became official U.S. policy in September after the outbreak of the Korean War. There was a massive increase in military spending, with the budget nearly tripling soon after the policy change was enacted. The NSC 68 report guided U.S. policy through 1970. Guam is a strategic military outpost in the Pacific. The Cold War really never ended. Now it's Russia and the United States, China and the United States. The Rosenbergs were executed in 1953. Truman dropped out of the 1952 presidential race. The same 1950 Middle East problems continue 7.5 decades later. The Super Bowl is the biggest sport event in America, and it's going to be a week from Sunday. Do you have a Super Bowl party here? Do you do anything for the Super Bowl?
Yeah.
It's a national holiday.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. The NFL is the most successful sports league in the U.S. Apartheid in South Africa ended in 1994. New York City honored Athea Gibson with a Harlem Street renaming August 25th, 2022. Later this year, Gibson's likeness is going, you're going to see it on the back of a United States quarter. Broadway open house lasted just 1 year, had an influence on George Carlin, of all people. NBC would have a big hit with the late night show starting in 1954, Tonight with Steve Allen. There were 4,063 drive-ins in the U.S. by 1958. You took your kids there. There are about 330 today. There were 4 movies, based or partially based on the Great Bridge robbery. About 3/4 of today's NBA players are African American. Silly putty. Silly putty was used by Apollo astronauts to secure their tools in zero gravity in the late 1960s and early 1970s. More than 3 million eggs of silly putty have been sold since 1950. It's still around. The Diners Club credit card was still primarily for travel and entertainment. The American Express first appeared in 1958. 2 bank credit cards would be introduced by the late 1950s. Interbank became MasterCharge, and today MasterCharge and Bank America or Visa International. The CIA overthrew Jacob Arbenz, the president of Guatemala, in 1954 on behalf of the United Fruit Company because he wanted to give unused banana growing lands to his citizens. Puerto Rico is still trying to figure out what it should be: independent, U.S. territory, or U.S. state. Oscar Collazo was sentenced to death on July 24th, 1952, but Truman commuted his sentence to life imprisonment. President Jimmy Carter commuted Collazo's life sentence September 1979, free from prison, died in Puerto Rico February 20th, 1994 at the age of 80. How many of you watched the Charlie Brown Christmas show? Charlie Brown and Snoopy live on, even though Charles Schulz passed away on February 12, 2000. The last new Peanuts comic strip was printed on February 13, 2002. Peanuts influenced many cartoonists, but newspapers have cut back financially and feature fewer and fewer comic strips. Charlie Brown Christmas is still shown on TV, and Snoopy is still a fan favorite. Disney re-released Cinderella in 1957, 1965, 1973, 1981, and 1987. The Dick Tracy show ended not because of the violence, but Ralph Burr died. There would be a cartoon Dick Tracy in the 1960s, a movie in 1990 with Warren Beatty and Madonna, which was a bomb. The franchise continues to live through this day. Dagmar bumpers. Remember, she had 2 assets. The Dagmar bumpers, here and here. Okay, there's a story behind this, and people who are car collectors know it. Originally conceived by Harley Earl, he was the GM, Vice President of Design. These conical bumper guards would mimic military shells. Now I'm going to ask you this question. How many of you had fathers, uncles, brothers who served in World War II? Any? Did they ever talk about their experiences in World War II? The answer is no, for the most part, unless they never served in battle and served stateside. Then they talk about it. But if they were in battle, the vets said, we're not talking about it. They held it in, only talked about it to the other vets, but they never talked about it. So all of a sudden, you got these things on the front of these GM cars that look like artillery shells, and you're trying to sell it to guys who don't want to talk about their World War II experience. There is a solution. The similarities of these features to then the popular bullet prop, epitomized by the buxom television personality Dagmar, was inescapable. They became the Dagmar bumpers. When they first came out, they were all chrome, but they inflicted so much damage to cars that were rear-ended by them. On later models, GM put rubber tips, black rubber tips on them to minimize the damage, but the rubber tips gave them the look that they were wearing pasties. See?
Yeah.
See what I mean? This guy is well known in Glen Cove because of this car. This car is in immaculate condition. It's a 1957 Chevrolet, complete with the bumper guards. CBS finally televised shows in color in 1965, long after ABC and NBC. Shirley Temple became a diplomat. In 2019, the singer-songwriter Alicia Keys, you know who she is? Alicia Keys? Some of you. Cited Hazel Scott as her inspiration for her performance at the 61st Grammy Awards, saying, "I've been thinking about the people who inspired me." A shout out to Hazel Scott. "I've always wanted to play two pianos." The United States ended its Vietnam involvement in 1975. I Love Lucy debuted in 1951. It is still celebrated 7 decades later. In fact, if this is Roku, if you get Roku on this TV, all 180 episodes are available for you to watch on the Roku channel called the I Love Lucy channel. The show featured an interracial couple. The Supreme Court of the United States legalized interracial marriage in 1967. The Respect for Marriage Act passed in Congress with bipartisan support, signed into law December 13, 2022. The Respect for Marriage Act mandates that individual states recognize same-sex and interracial marriages that were lawfully performed in another state. Gay rights remains an issue in 21st century America. Any questions, any comments? Your turn. Nobody? Yeah.
You know, you reminded me of something when you talked about the 50s.
Yeah.
I was in the Army in those years,
Yeah.
and I was on the Fort Monmouth basketball team.
Yeah.
And an interesting thing, we used to travel around the country to play other colleges and schools
Yeah.
and Army camps. And coming home one night in Baltimore, we stopped in a bar to have a beer, and they wouldn't serve the
Yeah.
one black soldier
guy,
on my team.
Yeah.
So we had to leave the place. It was the first time we ever ran into that kind of antagonism, where the guy at the bar in Baltimore said, "I can't serve this man because he's black."
Yeah.
He was on our basketball team,
Yeah.
so we had to walk out.
Yeah. I've
But
heard
it
one.
just reminded me of that. You know, I haven't thought about that for 50 years. But that's the way the country
Yes, it
was
was.
in those times,
Yeah.
especially in the South.
Yes. And some places in the north, like Baltimore. Like Baltimore, that's in the north. Baltimore, Murray said it happened in Baltimore.
Basketball team.
Yeah. Anybody else? Next month, you're gonna have a leadership talk, and this is what it's gonna be. It's gonna be all about women, because Women's Month is only a couple days later. It's about women who persevered. People like Clara Lemich and Susan B. Anthony and others, Patsy Mink, and it's about how they persevered. So that'll be next month. Anyway, that's it. So we will.
Thank you.
Later.
Thank you.
We're gonna get some water.